My husband got really mad when I dressed up for a work party without telling him. He scoffed, "Who are you trying to impress?" I said, "Someone who actually notices me." Later, his boss complimented me publicly on stage. Weeks later, he started copying my outfits. My name's Corinne, and I live in Minneapolis. I'm 42, and I work in corporate communications at a pretty big medical tech company based downtown. Been there 11 years. I'm decent at my job. Quietly competent, the type who makes sure the emails are polished, the press releases land well, the talking points are airtight. I've been married to Alden for 17 years. We met in our mid-20s, both overworked, both ambitious. He was a rising star at an investment firm, always in pressed slacks, Bluetooth in his ear. I liked his edge. The confidence. The way he took up space like he belonged in every room. Back then, I thought that kind of certainty was attractive. Now, I'm not so sure. Marriage, over time, doesn't blow up. It erodes. It wasn't like Alden did anything unforgivable. No cheating. No screaming matches. No secret bank accounts. It was the silence that got to me. The looks that weren't given. The conversations that stopped happening. The kind of neglect that doesn't leave bruises, just empty rooms. I can't tell you the exact moment I stopped feeling seen in my own home. Maybe it was when I brought up applying for a leadership training program and he didn't even ask how it went. Or when I chopped off 6 inches of my hair and he didn't notice until a week later, when a barista complimented me and he looked confused. We had our own routines. Alden worked late most nights. I curled up with books or took long walks with my headphones in. On weekends, he golfed or watched nature documentaries with the sound up so loud I could hear David Attenborough narrating through closed doors. We coexisted. Not quite roommates. Not quite lovers. Then, 1 month before the company gala, I was asked to lead the rebranding campaign for our firm. It was a huge deal. We were changing our entire external image, new logo, tone, messaging, everything. And I was in charge of it all. I poured myself into the project. Late nights. Strategy decks. Presentations. I hadn't felt that alive professionally in years. The gala was scheduled for early October. Hosted at Nicollet Island Pavilion, this charming spot on the river with fairy lights strung across the ceiling and an old brick interior that made everything feel warm and important. I didn't tell Alden much about it. He knew it was happening. I mentioned it over dinner one night. He nodded, eyes still on his tablet. The week of the event, I went shopping for something to wear. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. I just wanted to feel good. Look good for myself. I found a navy silk dress. Off-shoulder. Fitted, but classy. A dress that made me feel powerful in a way I hadn't in a long time. The evening of the gala, I got ready in our bedroom while Alden was downstairs watching a recap of some stock market podcast. I came down just to grab my clutch, heels clicking softly on the hardwood. Alden looked up from his glass of scotch, brow slightly raised. "You going somewhere?" I smoothed my hair and nodded. "The gala. Company event, remember?" He looked me up and down. Slowly. Not with desire. Not with admiration. More like suspicion. Or confusion. Then he scoffed. "Who are you trying to impress?" I should have let it go. But something in me snapped. I adjusted the strap of my dress, gave a tired smile, and said quietly, "Someone who actually notices me." And I walked out. I could feel his eyes burning into my back, but he didn't follow. He didn't call out. He just stayed on that damn leather couch. The event was transformative. I don't know how else to describe it. My team was excited. I got pulled into conversation after conversation. People I'd only interacted with via email complimented me in person. They asked about my thought process, my creative direction. I felt, for the first time in a long while, like my work mattered. Like I mattered. Then came the speech. Mr. DeWitt, our interim CEO, took the mic and launched into the usual thank yous and acknowledgements. Then he paused, scanning the crowd. And there's one person we absolutely have to thank, he said, adjusting his glasses. The woman behind the entire vision of this new identity, Corinne Harper. Stand up, will you? People turned. Applauded. I stood, awkwardly. Smiled. Felt my face flush. And in that moment, I caught a glimpse of someone in the back of the room. It was Alden. I hadn't invited him. Didn't even tell him where the event was. But there he was, half in shadow, standing just beyond the buffet table, still in his work clothes. He didn't smile. Didn't wave. Just stood there. I don't know how long he stayed. By the time I made my way to the back to maybe speak to him, he was gone. The next few days were strange. He was quiet, yes. But not cold. He started doing odd things. Like asking me if I liked the new cufflinks he ordered. They were minimalist, kind of like the branding palette I'd chosen for the rebrand. One day, I wore a cream blouse with gold details. The next week, he wore a cream tie with subtle gold stitching to a client dinner. I chalked it up to coincidence, at first. But then it kept happening. Same shades. Same tones. If I wore a dark green turtleneck on Friday, he wore a dark green button-up the following Monday. If I switched to more modern, clean-line jewelry, he stopped wearing his loud watches and swapped to a sleek, matte black one. It was subtle. But deliberate. He never said anything about the gala. Never mentioned the dress. Never asked about the compliment from the CEO. But he noticed. He noticed everything. And one night, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw him standing in the hallway just watching me through the mirror. Not in a creepy way. Just, watching. When I turned to look at him, he said, "You looked powerful that night." I didn't respond. Just nodded. He didn't say anything else. Just went back to bed. I didn't know what to make of it at first. Alden was never one to compliment unless it was performative, usually for show, or when others were around. To hear him say I looked powerful, quietly, with no audience, no angle, it hit different. But it also confused me. It wasn't followed by a grand gesture or an apology. He didn't bring me flowers the next day. He didn't suddenly change into someone more emotionally available. He just started observing. Closely. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more. I'd walk into the kitchen in the morning and find him already dressed. Usually, he was the 10 minutes before he leaves type of guy. Now, he was ready before me. Not only that, he looked good. Intentional. Like he'd spent real time planning what to wear. And the strange part? His outfits began reflecting mine. It wasn't copycatting in a literal sense, but it was clear. I'd wear burnt orange one day, he'd wear a copper tone tie the next. I started wearing loafers with my trousers, he bought a pair a week later. I mentioned in passing that I liked clean lines and softer silhouettes. He ordered a jacket with an unstructured collar from a designer I'd name-dropped during a podcast. I didn't confront him about it. I couldn't. Because deep down, I was afraid of what he'd say. Afraid it would ruin whatever fragile shift was happening between us. Instead, I just kept my distance. Observed him the way he'd started observing me. One Saturday morning, I was making coffee when he walked in, fresh from a shower, wearing one of those muted outfits again. Soft gray sweater. Clean white shirt underneath. My aesthetic. My taste. He leaned on the kitchen island, eyes scanning me. "You've been different," he said. I didn't answer right away. Just poured my coffee, leaned against the sink. "So have you," I said finally. He nodded slowly, not in agreement, but like he was absorbing it. "I've been thinking," he added, almost hesitantly. "About us. About what happened to us." That stopped me. I set my mug down, turned toward him. He didn't look at me directly. Just stared at the floor like the tiles held answers. "I think I stopped seeing you," he said. That line hit harder than I expected. It was such a simple sentence, but there was weight to it. Honest weight. The kind of thing people only say when they've sat with the discomfort long enough to admit they played a part in something breaking. Still, I didn't rush to comfort him. I just let the words hang. Because yes, he had stopped seeing me. 4 years. And no apology, no stylish jacket or mirrored outfit was going to change that overnight. Later that week, we went to a networking brunch hosted by one of my industry circles, mostly female executives and rising women in corporate leadership roles. Alden offered to join, which was unexpected. He'd always waved off these events as another excuse for people to humble brag over mimosas. But he came. Wore a slate blazer and navy trousers that matched a wrap dress I'd picked out. He didn't make jokes. Didn't try to dominate conversations. He stood beside me, silent mostly, and just listened. And then, toward the end, something happened. A woman I knew, Syra, complimented my dress and said, "You always look so effortlessly elegant, Corinne. Like you belong in some French film." I laughed, a little embarrassed, and thanked her. Alden smiled, then said, "She's always been like that. I just wasn't paying enough attention before." It wasn't performative. No smirk. No condescension. Just truth. And suddenly, I felt this ache in my chest. Not sadness. Not joy. Just the heaviness of years we'd both let slip by. Time we could have been better. Closer. Real. We drove home in near silence. I stared out the window, watching the city roll past, those familiar brick storefronts in Uptown, the same cracked sidewalk in front of our old corner bakery. Everything looked the same, but something in us was shifting. He pulled into our driveway and didn't get out right away. "I want to try again," he said, hand still on the steering wheel. I looked over at him. His jaw was clenched the way it always was when he was holding back emotion. "I don't know if it's that simple," I said. "I know," he replied. "But I want to try anyway. Not by saying all the right things. I want to learn how to notice you. Again. Properly." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to believe it yet. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. And that? That was something. After that car ride, nothing officially changed. We didn't set new rules, didn't draw up a fresh marriage agreement, didn't make any sweeping declarations. But there was this unspoken shift, something delicate and half-formed. A subtle rewiring of the way we existed in each other's orbit. And yet, it was like walking on soft ice. Every step felt like it might crack something underneath. Alden started spending more time at home. Not in the suffocating, hovering kind of way, but in this, uncertain presence. He'd sit in the living room with his laptop instead of closing himself off in his home office. He'd ask if I wanted to take a walk in the evenings. At first, I said no. Then one Tuesday, after a day that felt like an endless series of Zoom meetings and empty smiles, I said yes. It was late September. Leaves just beginning to dry at the edges. The neighborhood was quiet in that way it gets just before dusk. We walked without touching, without speaking much, the way strangers do when they don't know each other's current version. At one point, he pointed at a house down the block. "Didn't that one used to have a red door?" I blinked. "Yeah. They painted it blue in May." He gave a little surprised nod, and I realized he hadn't even noticed. All those walks I'd taken alone over the years, all the little things I'd seen change, he'd missed every one of them. Now, he was trying to see. It wasn't just the outfits. Though yes, that continued. He started styling his hair differently. He stopped wearing that overbearing cologne I used to quietly hate. And there was this moment, oddly intimate, where I caught him browsing through my bookmarked fashion blog on the iPad we usually shared for news. He didn't say anything when I noticed. Just locked the screen and looked at me. What? You're studying me, I said softly. He didn't flinch. I am. It wasn't said defensively. He meant it. I don't want to mirror you, he added. I want to understand the language you've been speaking this whole time, that I never bothered to learn. And God, if that didn't knock the wind out of me. I hadn't realized until that moment just how starved I'd been for acknowledgement. For someone to meet me where I was. Not demand that I come to them. Not belittle the things I loved or acted like my attention to detail was too much. He didn't try to fix it all at once, though. And I respected that. But that winter, something else happened. We were invited to another work event, this one more casual. An internal team mixer at a co-working space downtown. Pizza, wine, nothing fancy. I wore a deep forest green sweater and a pair of wide-leg slacks. Nothing flashy. Alden showed up midway through. I hadn't asked him to, but apparently, someone at my office had told him he was welcome. And when he walked in, I had to do a double take. He was wearing a soft green crewneck. The exact tone of mine. Paired with fitted slacks. Simple. Clean. Almost warm. People noticed. One of my coworkers, Brett, whispered, "You two matching now?" I gave a weak laugh, unsure what to say. But the part that really got me? When Alden walked over with a glass of wine and didn't just stand behind me like he usually did, like a ghost partner, hovering and silent. He actually joined the conversation. He asked people questions. He laughed, genuinely. No eye rolls. No pretentious tangents about the economy or asset portfolios. He didn't make it about him. He actually blended in, which, for Alden, was a near miracle. And when I glanced at him during a break in conversation, he gave me this soft smile. One I hadn't seen in years. One that didn't ask for anything, just said, "I'm here. I see you." But still, there was distance. I could feel it in the way we'd both reach for the same thing at the same time and quickly pull back. In the way we'd share a laugh, only for it to dissolve into silence neither of us knew how to fill. He wasn't the man I married anymore. But then again, I wasn't the same woman either. And as we moved through the season, it became more and more clear that even though something had shifted, something else had been lost. The night it all came to a head, it was snowing, one of those thick, quiet Minneapolis snowfalls where everything slows down and muffles. We were both home, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the fireplace crackling, some instrumental playlist playing in the background. We were sipping tea. That's how mundane it was. Then, out of nowhere, Alden set his cup down and looked over at me. "I know I've changed a few things, but do you even want this anymore?" There it was. No preamble. No build-up. Just the question, sitting there between us. I set my mug down too. My hands trembled slightly, whether from the heat or the nerves, I couldn't tell. "I don't know," I said truthfully. He nodded once. Slowly. As if he'd already rehearsed hearing that answer. "I think we'd both outgrown the version of us we were trying to save," I added. He didn't argue. Didn't beg. He just said, "Then maybe it's time we figure out who we are, separately." I didn't cry. Not then. We just sat there. Silent. Listening to the crackle of the fire, the wind against the windows, and the sound of something unraveling quietly, something that had been years in the making. It was the calmest heartbreak I'd ever experienced. The weeks that followed were filled with a kind of stillness I didn't know what to do with. We didn't separate officially. No papers. No, "we need to talk" dinner. We just slowed down. Gave each other more space. Like our marriage had gone from a boiling pot to a kettle left to sit, cooling, quiet, still giving off the occasional whisper of steam. Alden started sleeping in the guest room. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't storm out one night. He just moved his clothes gradually, bit by bit. I think we both needed it. The extra space. The silence between doors. It was gentler that way. Oddly, we were still polite. We'd pass each other in the kitchen. Make small talk about groceries, snow shoveling, bills. There were no arguments, no final straws. Just a growing understanding that we didn't know how to reach each other anymore, not without unraveling the fragile little piece we'd created. I went back to pouring my energy into work. More meetings, more creative proposals. I volunteered to lead a team-building retreat in Duluth. Got asked to mentor a new hire fresh out of grad school. I said yes to everything. Not because I wanted to climb higher, but because for once, I wanted to keep choosing myself. Meanwhile, Alden began nesting. In a way I hadn't seen from him before. He started cooking more, oddly enough. Not just frozen meals or takeout, but actual recipes. Roasted vegetables, soups from scratch, even sourdough attempts. It was like he needed something tactile. Something he could control, mold, taste. One evening, I came home from a late presentation and found him kneading dough in the kitchen. No apron, shirt sleeves rolled up, flour on his forearm. He looked up. Wanted to try that rosemary focaccia you mentioned last fall. I blinked. You remembered that? He nodded. You said it reminded you of your aunt's kitchen in Winona. With the stone tiles and the smell of herbs. It stopped me in my tracks. He remembered. After all those years of tuning out, of nodding distractedly while I spoke, now he was cataloging details I'd long assumed went unheard. That night, I didn't retreat to my bedroom. I sat at the table, sipped the wine he offered, watched him pull golden bread from the oven. It felt almost cozy. Like we were playing house again. Pretending to be those younger versions of ourselves who hadn't yet learned how to let love become background noise. He cut 2 thick slices, drizzled olive oil, handed me a plate. We didn't talk much. Just chewed. Chewed and nodded and smiled in that way people do when something tastes better than expected. But comfort isn't always clarity. Familiarity doesn't always mean fulfillment. A few days later, I was at a thrift store in St. Paul, my little escape spot, and I stumbled across a vintage navy trench coat. Perfect condition. Just my size. It was almost identical to the one I'd worn years ago, early in our marriage. Back when Alden used to notice things like that. Back when we were still growing toward each other, not away. I tried it on in the mirror, felt the weight of it on my shoulders, and suddenly, I started to cry. Quietly, standing between 2 racks of wool blazers and forgotten scarves. Not because of the coat. But because I realized I had no idea who I was trying to be anymore. For so long, I'd shaped myself around Alden, his preferences, his silences, his moods. Then, I'd started shaping myself around the absence of him. Around the woman I thought I should have been without his indifference weighing me down. But in that moment, I saw it clearly, I didn't know who I was on my own. Not really. I went home without the coat. When I got in, Alden was at the sink, rinsing something. He looked over, wiped his hands, and said, "You okay?" I hesitated. Then, finally, "No. I think I'm unraveling a little." He nodded, slowly. "I think I am too." We didn't hug. Didn't cry together. But that conversation, it marked a shift. The next morning, we talked. Really talked. About how we'd been wearing costumes for each other. How, for years, we'd dressed ourselves up in roles we thought the other wanted, him, the ambitious provider, me, the accommodating wife. How neither of us had paused to ask whether those roles still fit. He admitted he was scared. Of failing. Of being seen as weak. That maybe he had mirrored me because he didn't know what else to do, like he was trying to borrow my confidence until he could find his own. I admitted that I didn't trust myself. That I was terrified of starting over at my age. That I still felt invisible in ways I couldn't always articulate. And then, he asked me a question I wasn't expecting. What if we took time apart? Not as punishment. But as a reset. I froze. Not because I was angry, but because, deep down, I'd been thinking the same thing. Not divorce. Not yet. But time. Space. A pause to figure out who we were without the decades of routine and obligation fogging everything up. I said, maybe we should. That evening, we each poured a glass of wine and sat at the dining room table, like we were drafting a business plan for our separation. We made a list, what needed to be handled, who would move out, what we'd say to family. No shouting. No bitterness. Just two tired people trying to find their way out of something that stopped feeling like love a long time ago. A week later, I signed a 6-month lease on a small apartment in Northeast. Not far. Just across the river. I took only what I needed. Clothes, books, a few plants. I left the wedding album in the attic. Neither of us touched it. And the day I left, Alden helped carry the boxes to my car. He didn't cry. I didn't either. But right before I pulled away, he leaned in through the window and said, "You deserve to be seen." Always. I drove away with my chest full of both grief and something close to relief. This wasn't an ending. Not yet. But it was the first real beginning we'd had in years. I moved into my new place on a rainy Thursday. A modest one-bedroom apartment above a boutique wine shop in northeast Minneapolis. The ceilings were low, and the floorboards creaked, but it felt like mine. For the first time in over a decade, I had a space that didn't carry the invisible weight of compromise. No passive-aggressive sighs echoing from down the hallway, no awkward silences clinging to the walls. Just the steady hum of my own breath, my own choices. I filled it with small, intentional things: linen curtains, a worn leather reading chair from a local consignment store, a print of a Georgia O'Keeffe painting I'd always loved but Alden once called weirdly sterile. I let myself indulge in the quiet. Let myself breathe. In the early days, we texted here and there. Friendly updates. I'd send a picture of a fancy espresso I'd made, and he'd respond with a photo of his latest homemade bread. We weren't angry. Just apart. It was strangely peaceful. But in that quiet, something else started to grow, me. Without meaning to, I started taking up space again. In ways I hadn't realized I'd stopped doing. I joined a book club. I got back into yoga. I went to happy hours and art walks and met people, new people, who had never known me as Alden's wife, only as Corinne. And I started getting noticed. Professionally, too. After the success of the branding campaign, I was offered a position as the Director of Strategy and Communications. A big promotion. More responsibility. More money. More visibility. I almost didn't tell Alden, but when I finally did, out of habit more than anything, his response was clipped. "Wow. That's impressive." But I could hear the tightness in his voice. He wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something closer to discomfort. Like he didn't know where to place me anymore. And then came the board dinner. A formal affair at the Minneapolis club, tailored suits and cocktail dresses, the kind of event where introductions mattered and reputations were currency. I showed up in a tailored crimson jumpsuit, clean, powerful lines, low back, sharp neckline. Hair up. Confidence on full display. My team had begged me to attend, and I finally gave in. I didn't expect Alden to be there. But halfway through the evening, I saw him across the room. He was standing next to someone from the finance board, laughing a little too loudly. Wearing a navy blazer that looked eerily similar to one I'd donated to Goodwill months earlier, except now on him, tailored and crisp. His eyes met mine. He froze. Then, like muscle memory, he crossed the room with a drink in hand and that familiar half-smile. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. I raised my glass slightly. "Funny. I was invited." He looked down at my outfit, then back up at my face. I knew that look. He was scanning for weakness. A crack. Some hint that I missed him, that I still needed his approval. But I didn't. I didn't feel smaller in his presence anymore. In fact, the longer he stood there, the more I realized how much he'd shrunk in mine. A few minutes later, our new board chair, a sharp, charismatic woman named Mireia, walked over and looped her arm through mine. "There you are," she said brightly, grinning. "We were just talking about you. Everyone's been raving about the rollout campaign." I told them I wasn't surprised, it has Curran's fingerprints all over it. Alden's expression faltered. "Just a little." Mireia glanced at him. "I don't think we've met." He offered his hand. "Alden Harper. Finance consulting." "Oh," she said, polite but cool. "Curran's husband?" There was a pause. I didn't correct her. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Well, technically, we're on a break." "Oh," she said again, brightly. "Interesting." And then, in one swift motion, she turned back to me. "Come, I want to introduce you to the VP of Strategy at the New York office. She's obsessed with your rebrand. Says she wants to steal you." Alden lingered as we walked away, still holding his drink, blinking. I didn't look back. Later that night, as the event wrapped up, he approached me again in the coat room. Quietly this time. "No drink, no charm. You've changed," he said softly. I slipped on my coat, adjusted the collar. "No," I said. "I just stopped hiding." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. And maybe he didn't. That version of me, the woman who shrank to fit into his frame, who waited to be seen, who mirrored her ambition through someone else's lens, she was long gone. "You know," he added, a little desperate now. "I thought I was doing better." I tried. "I know," I said. "And I meant it. But you were trying to match me instead of meeting me." That's what he never understood. He thought copying my taste, wearing my colors, mimicking my style was enough. But it was never about the surface. It was about effort. About presence. About care. And he had waited too long to give any of those things when they truly mattered. A few weeks after that night, I heard from a mutual friend that Alden had taken a consulting job in Denver. New city, fresh start. I wasn't sad. I wasn't relieved either. Just neutral. Like something had closed without slamming shut. And me? I took the offer in New York. Mireia had followed through, set up the meeting, negotiated the offer, even sent me a bottle of wine when I accepted. I moved that spring, standing tall in a new apartment overlooking the city, with my own space again, this time bigger, bolder, and fully mine. I kept one item from my old life, a pair of gold cufflinks Alden had once given me on our 5th anniversary. I had them melted down and reshaped into a pendant. It rests just above my heart now. Not as a keepsake of what we were, but as a reminder of everything I reclaimed when I finally chose myself. And that, in its own quiet way, was the revenge he never saw coming.